We're watching a new kind of charity take over social media, where helping someone isn't just an act of generosity, but a performance designed for an audience. A person walks up to someone in need, offers money or food, and films the entire exchange so millions can witness it. And once the camera is involved, it's no longer just charity. It becomes a public display, shaped for attention, identity, and visibility. That transformation, from private kindness to performative generosity, is what we're going to explore today.
Hello and welcome to The Psychology of Us with Professor R.J. Starr, where we explore the mind's influence on life, relationships, and society. R.J. Starr is an existential psychologist, professor, and author dedicated to exploring the core challenges of human existence, how we find meaning, embrace responsibility, and navigate life's challenges. Known for a thought-provoking yet accessible approach, RJ inspires listeners to cultivate self-awareness, emotional intelligence, authenticity, and purpose. This podcast is designed for all psychology enthusiasts, practitioners, students, and anyone curious about why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. Each episode unpacks theories, explores complex questions, and offers insights that deepen understanding of the human experience. So settle in, stay curious, and discover the psychology of us.
We are living in a moment where visibility has become one of the most powerful social currencies we have. Our culture rewards being seen far more reliably than it rewards being good. So it shouldn't surprise us that generosity, which used to operate privately and quietly, has become something people perform. Now, to be fair, social media didn't invent the desire to look virtuous. We've always wanted that. But it did create an environment where virtue can be displayed, curated, and rewarded at scale. Think about the camera itself. It isn't just a recording device anymore, it's a spotlight. And once that spotlight enters an interaction, the meaning changes. The person helping isn't only offering assistance, they're presenting a version of themselves. They're shaping an identity around benevolence, compassion, and moral superiority. And the platforms we use every day make it incredibly easy to confuse the performance for the real thing. Now, what's striking is how naturally this shift has happened. As our lives became more public, so did our expressions of morality. Public goodness offers something private kindness does not. It offers affirmation, approval, and a sense of moral identity. Appearing generous becomes a way to confirm we're still good people in a world where goodness itself feels increasingly performative. But generosity loses something essential the moment it depends on an audience. Traditional charity valued discretion. It protected the dignity of the person receiving help and placed the entire meaning of the act inside the relationship between two people. It didn't need documentation or applause. Its value was inherent. Today, the reaction often matters more than the act, not because people are inherently insincere, but because the environment nudges them toward performance. The moment a camera turns on, the act becomes a dual purpose. Help the person in front of you while demonstrating your goodness to the people who will eventually watch the footage. Once you're demonstrating goodness, you're performing it. That doesn't mean the helper doesn't care. Sincerity and performance can coexist, but the environment rewards the appearance of virtue more reliably than the practice of virtue. And that's the shift worth examining. Once generosity becomes a public display, we have to ask what happens to the meaning of the act, the person receiving it, and the identity of the person performing it.
Have you ever wondered why a small, fictional town can feel more emotionally familiar than the world you live in? The Psychology of Gilmore Girls, a study of character, family, and emotional growth in Stars Hollow, looks beneath the charm of the show and into the psychological currents that make its characters feel so familiar. Psychology professor and author R.J. Starr brings together developmental theory, attachment research, identity formation, and narrative psychology to illuminate why Rory and Lorelai's bond feels both comforting and complicated, why Emily's intensity resonates across generations, and why characters like Paris, Lane, and Jess speak to the parts of us still trying to make sense of ambition, belonging, rebellion, and family expectations. This is not a fan recap. It is an exploration of how Gilmore Girls maps onto the emotional architecture of real life, showing how family systems shape us, how perfectionism develops, how autonomy is negotiated, and how generational wounds travel until someone decides to interrupt them. Readers who return to the series year after year will finally understand why it takes hold of them the way it does. Those drawn to psychology will find a study of character and emotional patterning that extends far beyond scripted television. If Stars Hollow has ever felt like home, this book will show you the psychology behind that feeling. Step back into the world you love with new clarity, deeper empathy, and a richer understanding of your own story. Pick up your copy of The Psychology of Gilmore Girls, a study of character, family, and emotional growth in Stars Hollow by R.J. Starr, and see the series and yourself in a completely new way.
Picture this. You know this feeling. Human beings change the second they know they're being watched, right? In psychology, we call this the Hawthorne effect. We adjust our behavior, our posture, our tone. We start performing. And that instinct gets amplified when the audience isn't just one person in the room, but millions of strangers on a screen. So when someone films themselves giving to a stranger, their motives begin to split. There may be a genuine desire to help, yes, but layered on top of that is the desire to be seen helping. Those two motives blend into a new emotional structure. The act becomes partly altruistic and partly self-confirming. Visibility allows people to confirm an identity. When we're seen as generous, we feel generous. When others praise our kindness, we internalize it. Sociologist Charles Cooley called this the looking glass self. It's the idea that we shape our identity based on how we think others perceive us. So the camera becomes that mirror, reflecting back a preferred version of ourselves. And in the digital age, that mirror is always available. It encourages repetition. It encourages escalation. It encourages the search for moments that will affirm one's moral identity again and again. This relates to impression management, how people curate their behavior to shape social perception. But the digital version takes this much further. We're no longer performing for a room, we're performing for a global audience. That scale changes the psychological reward. It strengthens moral self-enhancement. And self-enhancement, the belief that we are more ethical or more virtuous than we might be in private. What gets lost in this process is the relational core of generosity. When help is performed for an audience, the emotional energy shifts from the recipient to the perception of the giver. The person receiving help becomes part of the giver's identity building process. Their vulnerability becomes a prop. And the platforms we use amplify this pull. They reward content that shows dramatic emotion, gratitude, or relief. They reward the spectacle of kindness more than the substance of it. And so the act becomes shaped by what will be seen, not by what is needed. As this pattern becomes normalized, we have to ask what happens when generosity becomes entangled with validation? What gets sacrificed? And who carries the emotional cost of that? Most discussions and conversations of performative charity focus on the person giving, but the real psychological impact is on the person receiving it. Receiving help is already vulnerable. Being recorded transforms that vulnerability into content. A camera just doesn't capture the moment. It captures the person's emotional state, their uncertainty, their gratitude, their embarrassment. And once that footage is shared, the moment no longer belongs to them. It becomes a public artifact. And here's the messy truth. Gratitude can sit right next to humiliation. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, the recipient is often forced to make a brutal trade, sacrificing their dignity, a higher level need, just to secure basic survival. Relief can sit beside shame. A person can desperately appreciate the help and still feel used. That doesn't make them ungrateful. It makes them human. When a stranger films your reaction to receiving money or food, it does something psychologically significant. It reframes you from a person into a symbol. Your need becomes the raw material for someone else's identity. The giver isn't only helping, they're constructing a narrative in which your vulnerability plays a central role. Even if you consent, you're consenting from a position without equal power. You need the help. You don't control the frame. You don't control the audience. Human beings want to be helped, but they do not want to be displayed. Once someone's hardship becomes part of a performance, the emotional cost falls on them. They carry the exposure long after the giver moves on. The video circulates, the comments roll in, the views rise, and the person at the center of the vulnerability resumes their life, unchanged in circumstance, but now publicly symbolized as an object of charity. Performed charity distributes dignity upward. The giver gains it. The receiver loses it. Understanding that shift is crucial before we talk about what generosity is supposed to be. So, how does public generosity replace private care? The most striking part of this cultural shift is how normalized it has become. Public generosity often carries more weight than private care. The visible act is seen as more meaningful because it can be measured, it can be praised and circulated. Quiet care has no audience, it leaves no trace. And so, in an attention based culture, it becomes devalued. Human beings take cues from what they see repeated. If the most visible acts of kindness are also the most performative, we begin to mistake visibility for virtue. The emotional logic becomes, if no one saw it, did it matter? Did it count? Why bother? And that's the danger. Visibility starts standing in for proof. Proof of goodness, proof of empathy, proof of moral participation. And once generosity becomes proof rather than practice, the meaning of the act shifts. Viewers respond powerfully to film charity because it provides emotional clarity in a world that often feels overwhelming. But that emotional clarity obscures the cost. The person watching gets inspiration. The person filmed absorbs exposure. And we have to talk about the algorithms because they intensify the cycle through simple operant conditioning, rewarding whatever produces the strongest dopamine response. The platforms we use are designed to provide a dopamine hit that rewards emotional spectacle, and that includes the spectacle of kindness. So the act itself starts to get shaped by what will perform well online, rather than what will actually preserve the dignity of the human being in the frame. That's how public generosity begins to replace private care. Not because the private act is less meaningful, but because it offers no external reinforcement. And in a culture driven by visibility and validation, internal reinforcement often isn't enough. Performed charity doesn't simply help someone, it asks them to participate in a display. And that distinction is what matters. You see, when you strip away everything, the platform, the camera, the audience, the emotional payoff, generosity is simple. It's one person responding to another. It's relational and private. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need proof. And it doesn't need an audience. Performed charity asks something real generosity never asks. It asks the recipient to surrender their privacy. It asks them to become material in someone else's narrative. And it leaves them holding the exposure long after the moment ends. Real generosity protects dignity. Performed generosity uses it. If we want to understand the psychological impact of this cultural shift, we have to return to the kind of kindness that leaves no evidence behind, the kind that restores rather than extracts, the kind that strengthens both people rather than turning one into the backdrop of another. We live in a time where we are obsessed with being seen. So maybe the most meaningful form of generosity left is the kind that happens where the camera simply cannot follow.
That wraps up this episode of The Psychology of Us with Professor R.J. Starr. Each conversation is a step toward greater understanding of ourselves, each other, and the forces that shape human behavior. Listeners are invited to continue the conversation by sharing their thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions at profrjstar@outlook.com. Every message helps shape future episodes, ensuring the discussions remain relevant, thought-provoking, and meaningful. For those who find value in these explorations, subscribing and leaving a review is a great way to support the podcast and bring these insights to a wider audience. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring the psychology of us.
What does it really mean to be human? The Psychology of Being Human, an authoritative guide to mind, emotion, and meaning, is the groundbreaking new book by R.J. Starr. Already critically acclaimed for its clarity and depth, this book goes beyond pop psychology and quick fixes. It's a comprehensive guide to the mind, to the emotions that drive us, and to the meaning that shapes our lives. Starr connects powerful psychological insight with everyday experience, showing how understanding yourself also changes the way you see the world. The Psychology of Being Human is more than a book. It's the definitive reference for anyone who wants to live with greater awareness and deeper understanding. Get your copy of The Psychology of Being Human, an authoritative guide to mind, emotion, and meaning by R.J. Starr. Available now wherever books are sold.